Your daughter has been seriously injured in an accident. Please come to the hospital as soon as possible. But, ma'am, I don't have a daughter. I was working when I received a call from the hospital. The nurse on the other end made it sound like it was very urgent. As I listened to what she had to say, I discovered a shocking truth. The gist of it was that the car my husband was driving was involved in a pretty bad accident, colliding with another car from the right side, resulting in him and the woman whom he was riding with to be taken to the hospital. The woman in the car was a very young girl, seeming to be a little older than my son, who is 18. This is the story of how it turned out that my husband had been betraying me and my son, and how I wasn't going to make just him regret what he did, but also another certain person. I vowed I would plunge them both into despair, as they had done to me and my son. My name is Josephine, and I used to live with my husband, Trevor, and my son, Sawyer. When we were first married, Trevor and I were known by many of our neighbors and friends as a very close, lovey-dovey kind of couple, which might admittedly sound sappy and melodramatic, but the point was that we always got along, and we loved each other very deeply. But after 25 years, that relationship has changed. Over time, the notion that as the years go by, every married couple loses that element of lovey-dovey in the relationship that they had when they were first married became ever truer. Trevor runs a small business that he inherited from his father. My father-in-law himself, Mr. Windsor, was a business partner of my workplaces, and he took a liking to me and introduced me to his son. It wasn't exactly an arranged marriage, but Mr. Windsor's introduction was the true beginning of our relationship. Our infatuation with each other quickly blossomed into something bigger and better, and after a mere 6 months of dating, we were married. Unfortunately, Mrs. Windsor did not make me feel very welcome, and I felt very uncomfortable at my parents-in-law's house. Whenever I greeted her, she always gave me the cold shoulder and merely nodded cantankerously in response. When I talked to Trevor about it, he brushed it off as her just not hearing me. Is this what is commonly known as marrying into the family? If it was, then I must say I feel very sorry for all the girls that get married, because this was pretty unpleasant to say the least. But when I became pregnant, Mrs. Windsor's attitude towards me changed drastically, as I was carrying a son in my belly. Trevor and his mother were overjoyed that I was going to bear the true heir to the family business. "Josephine, my dear, you did amazing!"
"Well done, honey. It's a boy. It's a boy. A boy's gonna be born."
They were both dancing light fantastic with how happy they were that I was pregnant. But one thing I didn't particularly understand was how much they emphasized the joy towards me bearing a son instead of a daughter. I was quite frankly shocked at their reactions, as I thought they would be happy with either sex. Shouldn't my own husband be happy with his own child, regardless of if it's a boy or girl? That's what any sensible human being would be, right? It was a very strange feeling. And that feeling was completely justified by what Mrs. Windsor said next. "I was going to make him divorce you if you gave birth to a bitch, Josephine, my dear." She even had the audacity to say that with a smile on her face.
"I'm so glad you conceived a boy, hon. You should be thankful for the power of my genes. Thanks to me, you're not getting a divorce."
I was beyond surprised to hear Mrs. Windsor say what she said, let alone Trevor, but he was nonetheless laughing alongside his mother. If I hadn't gotten pregnant with a boy, I would have been divorced, and I felt fear in my heart for this family. The years went by, and before I knew it, Sawyer was a senior in high school. He had been playing soccer since elementary school and would rather have spent most of his time outside kicking a ball instead of studying at his desk. His father was frustrated with him and often yelled at him. The reason was that he wanted him to put his studies before soccer and go to a good university and study business administration. That was because he wanted his own son to be the rightful heir to the family business. However, our son had received a university scholarship for soccer. There was never a single option to study business administration in our son's career path in the first place. He had never even considered becoming the next president for his father's company, and I frankly didn't want him to be just that. But Sawyer knew that his father wanted him to go to a university with a high academic standard, and that's precisely why my son couldn't tell him about it. Even though he had already received a scholarship, the same goes for his mother-in-law. Every time she sees her grandson, she would always be like, So, you're trying to go to ABC University, sweetie? That's good. That's very good. Your grandfather graduated from that school, and it's gotten him to great heights. How were the results of the mock exam? She kept on talking to him under the assumption that he would go to ABC University. And the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, as neither Sawyer nor I could bring ourselves to tell Trevor and Mrs. Windsor the truth. One day, Trevor called his son to the living room. He was clearly angry, and something in the pit of my stomach told me exactly what he was angry about. He then held out a piece of paper in front of Sawyer. Upon realizing what the document was exactly, the poor boy's expression turned dark, and he began to tremble. I approached my son from behind, took a glance at the document, and saw that it was my son's college acceptance letter. My gut was spot on, and a storm was definitely brewing.
What the frick is this letter of acceptance? I told you I'll never allow anything but ABC University, where your own grandfather went to. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I want to go to university to pursue soccer, Dad. I wanted to tell you for so long, but I knew how you thought about it all, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything at all. I've been so good to you, and this is how you return your own father the favour. It's not like that. I'm just trying to live my own life, you know?
Sawyer was finally mustering up the courage to confront his father about what he wanted to do with his life. But he wouldn't have any of it, and brutally interrupted him as he said,
Well then, you know what? Don't ever show your frickin' face in front of me again. Don't you ever dare come home again. In this house, I have the absolute voice. If you can't listen to me and do what I frickin' tell you, you're no longer welcome in this house.
With these words, he forced my son out the front door. I hurried after him as he stumbled along the parkway, and I found tears streaming down his cheeks. Oh, honey, I'm sure one day your father will understand. For now, go to your grandparents' house until your father settles down, okay? The university has a dormitory, right? I'll talk to your father before then, see if we can come to an arrangement.
Thank you, Mum. I'm sorry about everything.
I wove my hands through his hair as I hugged him, and I could feel the faint sniffles coming from under my chin. I then called my parents and took Sawyer to their house to stay for a while. Good thing my parents lived in the same neighborhood as we did. I told them I would send his stuff later on, and after saying goodbye to him for the time being, I went home to find Trevor waiting for me. When I returned, he was standing in front of me, brows furrowed, arms crossed, face red as a tomato. He proceeded to yell at me.
You knew everything, and you never had the idea of telling me? What the frick is wrong with you?
I quickly apologized for not telling him the truth, but in my defense, I had good reason not to tell him. You see, my son never spent much time at his desk, but he was not an unintelligent kid. On the contrary, he was quite smart. He was smart enough to be able to go to ABC University if he worked hard enough. Based on that knowledge, Trevor and Mrs. Windsor were discussing the possibility of sending him to ABC University with full intentions. I didn't want to say anything because I felt like I would be interrupting the excitement, and if I did, life would have been much more different. Both of their verbal aspirations and psychological abuse was at an all-time low during the last 5 years, as Sawyer graduated middle school and went on to high school. And besides that, even if I had told my husband before he found out, I'm sure he would not have accepted my son's decision. I'm sorry for not telling you, honey, but I think you went too far when you kicked him out of the house.
Shut up. This is such a disgrace. This could very well be grounds for disowning him, ungrateful little bastard.
Now, Trevor, that's going too far.
A woman like you with no frickin' responsibilities whatsoever wouldn't understand the need for an heir, would ya?
He was right. I never understood why it just had to be Sawyer to become the next president. But we never talked about him becoming an heir to Trevor's company. We always talked about his future and what it could hold for himself and for us. Sure, it was expected of him to at least consider the possibility of inheriting his father's company, but that had always been his father's wish, not my son's. Trevor just couldn't seem to accept that fact. But Sawyer had thought long and hard about this decision himself, I was certain of it. And it wouldn't be so easy to change his mind when he's already made a huge accomplishment of getting in with a scholarship in soccer. As I remained silent, wondering what to say next, Trevor went on to say,
I'm going to call my mother now. I have to report what you and Sawyer did to her.
You don't have to do that. This is a family matter. Let's resolve it between the three of us.
Shut up. My mother is family too.
And thus Trevor called his mother. And from what I overheard over the loud volume of his phone, she did not seem happy. Oh boy, another obstacle to overcome. She came over mere minutes later, and Trevor went on to tell her all the details of what had happened. You really are frickin' useless except for the fact that you gave birth to a boy. He's such an ungrateful son of a bitch because you didn't raise him right. She blamed me for everything. After that day, Mrs. Windsor came to our house every day and appeared to have the singular purpose of verbally abusing me and harassing me with very sarcastic comments about everything she could think of. She blamed me for things that were completely illogical and preposterous. In addition to that, Trevor complained about everything I did, from the way my food tastes to the way I cleaned to the work I did at my job. He didn't seem to like anything about me at all. And as he complained about everything 24/7, I grew more and more exhausted. I visited my son at my parents' home, and he would see how exhausted I was and begin to worry about me.
I'm so grateful to you, Mum. And don't you dare overexert yourself for my sake. You've always supported me in what I wanted to do. Without you, I don't think I would have even been able to continue playing soccer.
That's what he told me, and that made me relieved that Sawyer had grown up to be so kind and honest. Coming to see him was the only thing in life that was of some consolation for me. Then one day, while I was at work, I received a call on my cell phone from an unknown number. When I answered the phone, I found it was a call from a local hospital. The nurse on the other end made it sound like it was very urgent. Your daughter has been seriously injured in an accident, ma'am. At first, I thought it was the wrong number because I don't have a daughter, never have, never will. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't have a daughter myself. When I told her that, the nurse went on to tell me the most astonishing story. I told her I was on my way to the hospital and hung up the phone. I explained the situation to my boss and asked him to let me go home early. I rushed to the hospital where I found Trevor lying in bed with a cast surrounding his entire right leg. From the looks of it, it looked like he suffered a compound fracture to his femur for sure, and perhaps one or more other leg bones were broken as well. I then looked at the bed next to him and saw a young girl lying there. From what remained of her, I could make out certain features that suggested she was a little older than Sawyer, and easily capable of being a daughter to us when it came to how young she looked. I talked to the nurse who had called me a few minutes prior, and she told me that Trevor and this woman had been brought to the hospital together after a pretty vicious car accident. The nurse mistakenly thought she was Trevor's daughter because she simply looked young enough. As I was listening to the doctor talk about his condition, he seemed to wake up.
Where the hell am I?
He was rubbing his eyes with a blank expression on his face when I turned in his direction. We're at the hospital, Trevor. You've been in a car accident.
Oh, damn. I didn't know that. No wonder my leg hurts.
The fact he was smiling, so carefree and innocent, made my blood boil. The woman next to you is in critical condition, darling. How can you act so innocent,
Wanda, wake up, please. Wake up.
He started calling out in a loud voice. Distraught, Trevor seemed to have completely forgotten that I was standing there, right in front of him. He was so upset that he screamed as he began to cough and hack away, and he winced and grunted in pain as he did so. And then he remembered my presence. His expression immediately shifted into one of panic. Now, normally, anyone would have thought he would be giving me all these excuses as to what the nature of this was, like, no, it's not what you think, or I was only helping a friend out, or bullshit like that. But no, this was Trevor Windsor we're talking about, the same bastard who verbally and psychologically abused me alongside his equally unbearable mother. I suppose you can guess how he reacted.
I cheated on you because you're nothing but a useless scumbag. I didn't do anything wrong, and because of you, my precious Wanda got into an accident, and now she's in this frickin' mess. I'll never forgive you. You hear me?
Don't you have something to say before that?
What? You actually gonna tell me to frickin' apologise? I didn't do shit, bitch, and you can't blame me for frickin' anything.
I sighed and left the hospital room, knowing there's nothing I can say to him that would turn the tables in my favor. Behind me, he continued to curse and scream insults at me, but I didn't care anymore. I left the hospital and went to a certain place that I'll reveal to you at the right moment. A few hours later, I got a bunch of phone calls from Mrs. Windsor. They were so insistent and so annoying that I finally picked up the phone only to hear, "Get your stupid ass to the hospital now!" Before hanging up the phone, I made my way to the hospital room alongside somebody special, who I will also reveal very soon. As soon as she saw me, she lunged and grabbed me by the chest and said, "You are a pestilence to the bitter end! My darling son is in this mess all because of you! What are you going to do about it?" "And what do you mean by that, Mrs. Windsor? What are you going to do about it, you ask? Why, I'm going to exact my revenge, of course. I've done nothing, Amelia. This is what happens when you cheat on your wife and float around in a happy daydream. I was just doing my work as per usual." "If you'd done your job properly as his frickin' wife, he wouldn't have cheated on you, you frickin' ugly bitch! And this beautiful young lady got hurt too, all because of you! We're holding you responsible for her medical bills, damn it!" I was already laughing at this point. At that moment, I invited that special someone inside the room, who was actually waiting for me outside the hospital room. That person was none other than Mr. Jackman, one of the most well-respected lawyers who specializes in divorces caused by adultery in town. And I personally hired him to take care of this case, as it involved two extremely stubborn, abusive individuals. Evidently, Mr. Jackman listened to everything as he was waiting, and he was trying so hard not to laugh at Trevor's comments and at Mrs. Windsor's. He and I locked eyes for a brief instant and smiled as he said,
"You've won big time, Miss Josephine."
His smile was very warm and way too grandfatherly for someone his age. This guy was 10 years younger than me.
"Nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Windsor. If you don't know who I am, here's my card."
Mr. Jackman handed his business card to Trevor and Mrs. Windsor.
"Of course, you're entitled to compensation for your husband's infidelity, Miss Josephine, but from what I've just overheard, your husband and his mother made multiple comments that undoubtedly made you feel trapped mentally. Such abuse will also be solid grounds for totally separate demands for alimony, and no need to worry for proof. I've recorded it all myself."
The lawyer began to explain the details in an indifferent manner. Both Trevor and Mrs. Windsor looked shocked and perplexed at the lawyer's presence in the room, and judging from their faces, they looked like they were a couple of codfish trying to understand Stephen Hawking as he explained the origin of the universe. And Mr. Jackman was using easy language that even I, a total noob at law, could understand perfectly. After a few minutes, Mr. Jackman turned to me and said,
"In conclusion, Miss Josephine, we can claim alimony from your husband, his mother, and the person with whom you had an affair. Is that what you wish?"
"Of course, sir. Please proceed with the arrangements." While I was talking with him, Trevor, being the selfish bastard he is, started to make a fuss.
"Don't you have any feelings at all, Josephine? I'm freaking injured here. Don't be freaking silly."
"Yeah, that's exactly what a lot of people who cheat on their wives often say, bucko. And who are you to tell me I don't have any feelings? You're the one who has none." I immediately signed the divorce documents my lawyer had prepared and thrust them over to Trevor. But he was resisting and refused to go through with the divorce. As for my mother-in-law, "I don't care who your wife is, honey. As long as it's not this frickin' hag, you really don't have to be attached to her." She put her hand on her son's shoulder to calm him down, but he didn't hear her voice whatsoever.
"I don't want a freaking divorce, Josephine."
Give me 1,000 years and I still wouldn't be able to understand why he resisted divorce so adamantly if he had no love for me or his son. Then he began to reveal exactly why he was against it.
"Look, if I divorced you and word got out, there would be some people who'd think that I might be the root cause of the divorce, won't there? If I divorced you, it would reflect badly on my professional reputation. That's what I don't like in all this. If it gets out that the president of a company had an affair and got divorced because of it, my dignity will be completely ruined. When Sawyer takes over the company and I become chairman, I'll do you the favour of divorcing you and kicking you out."
Solid, but irrelevant. You see, since my husband, who thought only of himself, became the president of his father's company, the business had been deteriorating rapidly, and the dignity he's scared to lose is virtually non-existent already. His company is in a constant state of debt and is continuously losing money. As Trevor continued to resist, Mr. Jackman settled the whole skirmish with 11 simple words.
"If you don't agree to divorce, we will go to court.
He then proceeded to add a few details once Trevor went dead silent.
You'll have to pay more than just alimony, but if you're willing to do so, you may not accept the divorce right here, right now. But please be prepared, because even the lawyer you will hire will agree that you will never win in the trial. Should it become a reality, that is. So, what will it be, Mr. Windsor?
When Mr. Jackman told him this, Trevor hastily signed the divorce documents. Mrs. Windsor just stood there, not knowing what to do. I said goodbye to them both and left the hospital room with Mr. Jackman following me close behind. I then went to the city hall and my divorce with Trevor was finalized. I offered a token of appreciation to Mr. Jackman, which was a free afternoon snack of an espresso and a chocolate chip scone, alongside the fee of the transaction. I then went back home to my parents and told my son what had happened and about the divorce.
As long as you're doing well, Mum, that's all that matters to me. Thank you so much for all your hard work.
Those words finally allowed me to relax once and for all, and he and I went out for a barbecue dinner that night as a celebration of his getting accepted to university through a soccer scholarship. Later on, demands for alimony and child support arrived at Trevor's doorstep, as well as compensation from the parents of the woman whom he had cheated on me with. I was told that the compensation was for the injuries that were ultimately caused because he was cheating on me with her. The woman's parents think that she was forced to have relations with him without knowing that he was married, but in fact, she was not. Of course she knew my husband was married because she was an employee of his company herself. But that didn't matter to the woman's parents. He was to pay all her hospital bills and her salary while she was off work. I also filed for alimony against Mrs. Windsor for the psychological abuse she'd been inflicting upon me. Mr. Windsor found out about what his son had done and about the fact that his own wife had been encouraging him to cheat on me. And he has been trying to get a divorce out of his wife for some time now. Additionally, because Mr. Windsor himself was chairman of the board of his own company, after retiring, he had the authority to expel Trevor from the company. And that's exactly what he did, as he forced Trevor to step down from his position as president of the company. After being ousted from the company, Trevor had no place to work and was obviously making zero money. So he asked me through my lawyer to reduce the amount of alimony, which I, of course, refused. I didn't need to be merciful with my husband at all. I'm just giving him a taste of his own medicine. He just needs to be repentant and get on with his life as well as he can. Sawyer graduated high school a few months later, and just last month he started his new life as a university student. We moved to a new house near the university, as I decided to live with my son so that he would not have to live in a dormitory. As it so happened, there was a branch of my company right next to his campus, and I wanted to make some changes and clear my mind from the events of the past year, so I decided to move. Sawyer welcomed the idea with open arms, so I was able to move without a sense of intrusion on his life. My son's dream is to become a soccer player. Of course, I know it will not be an easy road, but I will do everything I possibly can to support him as he does his best to achieve his dream and not somebody else's.